I came to save you." Those were the words Jesus said to me in the middle of the worst morning of my life, while I was running for my life through a canyon in New Mexico. The first shot kicked up dust less than 6 feet from my bare feet, and I knew, with the cold certainty only someone who has already looked death in the face can know, that this time they would not let me go. My name is Miriam Sultani, and this is my testimony, exactly as I lived it. If something in this is already sitting heavy in your chest, hit the like button before I go further. It helps this find the people who need to hear it tonight. Before you go anywhere, check the first pinned comment under this video. "Don't let her reach the canyon," a rough voice shouted behind me, and the echo bounced off the red rock walls like the desert itself wanted to give me away. I ran with my dress already stained with dirt and sweat, my dark hair whipping across my face, my lungs burning like I'd swallowed hot coals. The stones on the trail cut into the soles of my feet, but the pain felt distant, almost like it belonged to someone else, because fear had taken over my whole body completely. Behind me, 4 riders kicked up a thick cloud of dust rising into the deep blue morning sky, and the sound of hooves pounding the dry New Mexico earth was like a war drum getting closer, closer, closer. "Take her alive. Bo wants her alive," the same man ordered. And something about that phrase, alive, like I was livestock, like I was a thing, tore a sob out of me that mixed with the ragged sound of my own running. I'd been running for 3 days by then. 3 days hiding among the rocks, drinking water from muddy pools, eating whatever I could find in the thorny brush. 3 days since I'd escaped the Colton Ranch, since I'd broken the arrangement my father, already dead, had left behind like a poisoned inheritance, a debt I never asked for, a promise I never made, a marriage to Bo Colton that would have made me little more than property in the hands of a man whose cruelty was known across 3 counties. The canyon opened up ahead of me like a mouth carved into stone, narrow, tall, its walls climbing toward a sky that seemed to mock my desperation, with its perfect, indifferent blue. I ran into it hoping for a hiding place, a crack in the rock, anything that could save me. But the path only narrowed and narrowed until it became a stone corridor with no visible way out. "She's trapped," one of the men shouted, and his cruel laugh echoed off the canyon walls like the rock itself was laughing at me. That's when it happened. In the exact instant my legs had nothing left to give, in the exact instant I felt my strength leaving me, and the whole world shrank down to the sound of my own heart slamming against my chest like a caged animal. That's when I saw him. A rider appeared at the far end of the canyon, on a horse black as coal, moving with a grace that didn't seem entirely of this world. The man wore simple white clothing cinched with a red sash, and his dark hair fell over his shoulders while the desert wind stirred it gently, like even the air treated him with something like reverence. He carried no weapon, wore no hat against the merciless sun, and yet there was something in the way he simply existed there, a stillness, a contained strength that made me stop dead in my tracks, my chest heaving, unsure whether I'd just found rescue or a new kind of danger. "Run to me," the man shouted, and his voice, though not loud, cut through the canyon air like it carried its own weight, like every word held an authority that left no room for doubt. I hesitated only a second, one eternal second in which the hoofbeats behind me grew louder, closer, hungrier. And then I ran toward him, toward that stranger with dark eyes and a gaze that seemed to reach straight through to my soul. With the last of the strength left in my body, "Get on," he said, reaching his right hand down from the horse. And without thinking, without questioning anything, I took that hand. The contact was strange. It wasn't just the strength with which he lifted me, almost effortlessly, like my weight meant nothing, but something deeper. Something that moved up my arm like a warm current. Like that hand carried inside it a comfort I hadn't felt in years. He pulled me up onto the horse in front of him. And in that instant, with the hunter's horses less than 100 feet away, the rider in white pulled the reins, and the black horse turned with an impossible speed, almost like it was flying over the ground. "They won't get away," the man who seemed to lead the hunters bellowed, a stocky man in a wide-brimmed hat with a rifle slung across his back. "Mr. Colton will pay double to bring her back." I clung to the stranger's waist with both hands, feeling the horse's gallop shake my whole body, feeling the wind hit my face while the canyon rocks blurred past in rust-colored streaks. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid he could feel it through his own back. "Who are you?" I managed to ask between gasps, my voice broken by fear and effort. "Why are you helping me?" The man didn't turn to look at me. He kept his eyes forward, guiding the horse through the canyon's curves with a precision that seemed to know every stone, every crack, every shadow on the path. "I came to save you," he said simply. And those 4 words, spoken with a calm that clashed violently against the chaos of the chase, landed in my chest like a promise I couldn't yet understand. "That doesn't answer anything," I shouted, as a shot whistled past my left ear, close enough that I felt the air move. "Get down," was all he said. And with one firm movement he shielded me, leaning over me, covering me with his own body while the horse kept galloping between the rocks. Behind us, the hunters started falling back. Not because their horses were slower, they were strong animals, well-fed, from the Colton family's private stable, but because the path the man in white had chosen kept narrowing, growing more treacherous, full of loose rock and drop-offs that only a rider who knew every inch of that canyon could cross without falling. "We're going to lose her," the man in the wide-brimmed hat roared, pulling on his own horse's reins as it reared back, spooked by a gap too deep to jump. I pressed my face against the stranger's back and felt tears finally break through the wall I'd held up for 3 days of running alone. "Why?" I whispered, barely any voice left. Nobody risks their life for a stranger. The rider slowed the horse as the sound of the hunters faded between the canyon walls, and he turned his face to look at me. His dark eyes, deep, carrying an ancient sadness mixed with a tenderness that seemed to have no bottom, settled on me with an intensity that left me breathless. "You are not a stranger to me, Miriam," he said. And hearing my own name from the lips of a man I had never met before sent a chill down my whole spine. "I've seen you cry every night since your father died," he said. "I've seen you carry a debt that was never yours, and I've seen you run these 3 days with more courage than most men carry their whole lives." I felt the world stop for a moment. The desert heat, the sweat on my forehead, the trembling in my hands still gripping that impossible man's waist. Everything grew distant against the absurd, impossible, and yet undeniable certainty that this stranger knew things about me nobody else could know. "That's not possible," I murmured, more to myself than to him. "Nobody's seen me." I was alone. "You've never been alone," he answered, his voice so soft it nearly disappeared into the desert wind. "Even when you believed you were. If you're still with me, don't go anywhere yet, because what happens next is the part I still can't tell without my hands shaking a little. And there's something waiting in the pinned comment under this video I don't want you to miss before we're done." The horse kept moving down a trail descending into a hidden valley tucked between the mountains, a place I'd never seen before, with unexpected green trees growing beside a thin river winding through gray rocks. The contrast with the dry canyon was so sharp that for a moment I thought I was dreaming, that exhaustion and fear had finally cost me my sanity. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, my voice still shaking, but with a curiosity starting to break through the fear. "To a place where you're going to heal," said the rider, guiding the horse toward a small cluster of adobe houses in the distance, thin columns of smoke rising from a few chimneys. "But I want you to know something, Miriam, before we get there." I waited, my heart still racing, my hands gripping the white fabric of his shirt. "Bo Colton isn't going to stop looking for you," he continued, and for the first time his voice took on a graver tone, almost a warning. "What's coming isn't over. It's only just beginning. But I promise you this, You won't face it alone. Never again alone. I wanted to ask 1,000 more questions. Who was this man really? How did he know my name? How had he known exactly where and when to find me in the middle of all that desert? But 3 days without proper sleep, combined with the adrenaline finally draining out of my body, left me without the strength to keep talking. I closed my eyes for a moment, resting my forehead against that stranger's white-shirted back, and for the first time in 3 days, I let my body relax, even if only a little, even if only for as long as the ride to that hidden valley lasted. Behind us, far behind by then, the man in the wide-brimmed hat had dismounted, furious, pounding the ground with his closed fist. "Mr. Colton is not going to be happy about this," he muttered through his teeth, staring at the canyon that had swallowed the fugitive and her mysterious rescuer. "We're going to find her. If we have to burn every ranch, every town, every corner of this cursed desert. She belongs to Beau, and Beau always gets what he wants." And in the sprawling ranch house standing like a wound of luxury in the middle of the region's poverty, a young man with cold eyes clenched his fists at the news. "We'll find her," said Beau Colton, with a calm more terrifying than any shout. "And this time, she's going to regret ever trying to run from me." The sun was already leaning west when the black horse entered the small valley, and I woke with a start, not remembering exactly when exhaustion had finally won and put me to sleep against a stranger's back. "We're almost there," said the rider, his voice so calm that for a moment I forgot I'd been running for my life only hours before. The valley opened up like a secret kept between the mountains. A handful of adobe houses gathered around a central well, mesquite trees shading dirt streets, chickens pecking between the stones, and beyond it all a thin river shining under the golden light of late afternoon. It smelled like burning wood, fresh bread, damp earth. It was, I thought with a sharp ache in my chest, the kind of place I'd once dreamed of having someday with my father, before the debt, the sickness and death took it all away. "What's this place called?" I asked, my voice still rough from the day's effort. "The people here call it Hidden Valley," he answered, guiding the horse toward one of the farthest houses, white walls, a roof of woven palm fronds. "You'll be safe here, Miriam, at least for now." An older woman with gray hair pulled back in a braid and hands worn from years of hard work came out to meet us before the horse had even fully stopped. Her face, lined with wrinkles that spoke of decades under the desert sun, lit up at the sight of the rider, and her eyes filled with a mix of surprise and something close to reverence. "Teacher," she said, bowing her head slightly, "we weren't expecting you so soon." "Miss Nora," the rider answered, dismounting first and then helping me down from the horse with an almost fatherly care. "This young woman needs rest, food, and a safe place. I trust you'll take care of her like family." Miss Nora looked me over, noticing the cuts on my bare feet, the dirt stains on what had once been a white dress, the barely contained trembling in my hands, and something in her expression softened even further. "Poor thing," she murmured, taking my face gently between her rough but warm hands. "You're safe now, honey. Nobody's going to hurt you here." I wanted to speak. I wanted to ask again who this man really was, the one this old woman called teacher with so much devotion. But the exhaustion and emotion of the last few hours finally overwhelmed me, and I felt my legs give out. Miss Nora, with a strength surprising for her age, caught me before I hit the ground. "Let's get you inside," said the old woman, guiding my arm over her shoulders. "You need something warm to eat and a real bed to sleep in." The rider stayed outside, seeing to the horse while Miss Nora led me into the house. The space was humble but clean. Whitewashed walls, a wood-burning stove in one corner with a clay pot simmering, a small altar with a lit candle beside a worn-framed picture, and a bed covered in hand-woven blankets. The smell of chicken broth with herbs filled the air, and for the first time in 3 days my stomach growled with real hunger instead of the desperation that had kept me running. "Sit down," Miss Nora told me, pointing to a wooden chair by a small table while she ladled out a steaming bowl of broth. "Eat slowly, your body isn't used to it." I picked up the spoon with shaking hands and tasted the first mouthfuls. The warmth of the broth slid down my throat and spread through my chest like a long-awaited embrace, and unable to hold it back any longer, I started crying again. This time not from the urgency of fear, but from the accumulated weight of 3 days, months really, of pain that had finally found a safe place to fall apart. "Cry, honey. Cry all you need to," said Miss Nora, sitting beside me and rubbing my back in slow, gentle circles. "There's nobody here to judge you for it." Several minutes passed like that, me between tears and spoonfuls of broth. Miss Nora silent, offering the only medicine that really mattered in that moment. Company without demands, without questions, without conditions. "Who is he?" I finally asked when the tears started to ease, and I found some of my composure again. "You called him teacher." "He's a healer," said Miss Nora, a smile spreading across her face, carrying a wisdom that seemed to go beyond the simple words she finally spoke. "It's Jesus, honey," she said, as if that answer explained everything and nothing at the same time. "He's been with us in this valley for a long time. He heals the sick, comforts those who suffer, and sometimes, like today with you, he goes out looking for whoever needs him most." I felt a chill run down my spine, not so different from the one I'd felt in the canyon when he said my name without me ever telling him. "That can't be possible," I whispered, more to convince myself than to argue with the old woman. "Jesus lived 2,000 years ago. This has to be a name, a nickname, something symbolic." "Call it whatever you want, honey," Miss Nora answered, shrugging with a calm that left no room for doubt. "All I know is that 5 years ago, he came to this valley when my grandson was dying of fever, and he laid his hands on him. And the next day that boy was running and playing like nothing had ever happened. All I know is that ever since, whenever someone in this valley is suffering, he shows up without anyone calling him, without anyone knowing how he finds out." I stayed quiet, turning those words over as I finished the last of the broth. Outside I could hear the horse whinnying softly in the distance and the slow footsteps of the man in white moving through the shadows of dusk. "Rest now," said Miss Nora, standing to take away the empty bowl. "There'll be time for more questions tomorrow. Tonight your body needs to heal just as much as your soul does." I lay down on the bed, feeling for the first time in days the soft texture of the blankets against my battered skin. And though my mind was still full of questions about Jesus, about the valley, about what would come next, exhaustion finally won the battle, and I fell asleep almost instantly, the distant sound of crickets, and the murmur of the river my only company. When I woke, it was already full night, and through the small window of the room, I could see Jesus sitting by a fire in the yard, his gaze lost in the flames, in a stillness that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 silent worries. I got up, wrapping one of the blankets around my shoulders, and went outside barefoot, pulled by a curiosity that overrode any caution. "Couldn't sleep," I said, sitting a respectful distance from him by the fire. "Too many questions." Jesus looked at me with those dark eyes that seemed to hold entire oceans of understanding, and for a moment he said nothing, letting the crackle of the wood fill the silence between us. "Ask whatever you need to ask," he finally said. "I won't hide anything from you, Miriam." "Why me?" I asked, my voice carrying a vulnerability I rarely let myself show. "Of everyone suffering in this world, why did you come for me?" Jesus stayed quiet a moment, as if carefully choosing each word he was about to say. "Because your heart, in spite of everything you've suffered, is still pure," he said. "Because you carried a debt that wasn't yours without letting hatred consume you. Because even while running for your life, your first instinct was to protect the people who helped you along the way, even if it meant putting yourself at more risk. That, Miriam, isn't common. That deserves to be protected." I felt tears rising again, but this time not from pain, from a gratitude so deep I didn't know how to put it into words. "Bo isn't going to give up," I said, changing the subject because the weight of the tenderness in Jesus' words was too much to hold in that moment. "You said so yourself. He's going to keep looking for me." "I know," Jesus answered, a seriousness hardening his features slightly. "That's why I need you to trust me, Miriam, even when things get harder than you can imagine. The road to your freedom isn't going to be easy, but I promise you won't walk any part of it alone." Right then, the sound of hoofbeats approaching from the main road into the valley broke the night silence, and we both turned toward the entrance of the settlement, where a lone rider had stopped in front of the first house, asking something of a resident who'd come out to investigate the noise. "Someone's asking questions," Jesus said, standing with a calm that didn't fully hide the tension in his shoulders. "And I'm afraid, Miriam, they already know you're here." The lone rider turned out to be just a traveler asking directions to the neighboring town, and though my heart took several minutes to settle back into its normal rhythm, the scare served to remind me of something I already knew but needed to hear out loud. I couldn't stay hidden forever without understanding what I was actually fighting against. "Tell me everything," I said to Jesus the next morning, as we walked together along the river that bordered the valley, the sun just rising over the mountains and tinting the water gold. Not half-truths, everything. Jesus walked with his hands folded behind his back, an unhurried pace that contrasted with the urgency I felt in my chest. "What exactly do you need to know?" he asked. Though from his expression I sensed he already knew the answer before I said it. "I need to understand how all of this started," I said, stopping beside a large rock at the river's edge. "I need to understand why my father, an honest man who worked the land his whole life, ended up owing so much money to Wade Colton that the only way to pay it back was me." Jesus sat on the rock, gesturing for me to do the same, and I settled beside him, feeling the coolness of the stone against my tired legs. "Your father, Rashid, worked the Colton land for 15 years, Jesus began, his voice carrying the weight of a story he knew in every detail. "Every harvest season, Wade lent him money for seed, for tools, to keep his family fed through the dry months. And every season the debt grew a little more, because Wade Colton made sure the interest always outpaced whatever an honest man could actually earn working that land." I felt my stomach turn, not from surprise, because part of me had always suspected something like this, but from the painful confirmation of an injustice that had shadowed my whole childhood with constant scarcity. "So my father never had any real chance of getting out of that debt," I said, my voice carrying years of accumulated rage. "It was a trap from the beginning." "It was exactly that," Jesus confirmed. And for the first time I noticed a flash of something like restrained anger in his dark eyes. "Wade Colton has used the same scheme on at least a dozen families in this region. He lends money he knows they'll never be able to repay, and when the debt becomes impossible, he demands another kind of payment. Land, cattle, or in your case, a marriage that secured total control over the one living daughter of an already sick and desperate man." The tears I'd been holding finally spilled over, but this time they weren't tears of fear or sadness. They were a fury burning through my whole chest. "My father died thinking he was protecting me," I said, my voice breaking, "thinking that by promising me to Bo, he was guaranteeing I'd have a roof, food, a life without the hardships he'd lived through. He never knew he was handing me over to a monster." Jesus stayed quiet a moment, letting the sound of the river fill the space between us. And when he finally spoke, his voice carried a gentleness that sought, without pushing, to guide me toward something deeper than simple rage. "Your father loved you, Miriam. Never doubt that. The deception didn't come from him. It came from a man who built his entire fortune on other people's desperation. The anger you feel is valid, but be careful that anger doesn't turn into the same stone Wade Colton carries in his own heart." "How can you ask that of me?" I said, turning to face him with eyes full of tears and an intensity I hadn't shown until that moment. How can I not hate a man who destroyed my family, who turned me into merchandise, who's now sending armed men to marry me off like livestock? I'm not asking you to pretend it doesn't hurt, Jesus answered, holding my gaze without looking away for even a second. I'm asking you not to let that pain decide who you are. Hate, Miriam, is a chain that binds the one carrying it tighter than the one who caused it. Wade Colton already lost his soul a long time ago, chasing power and money. Don't let him take yours too. I lowered my eyes to the water running smooth over the river stones, sitting with those words, feeling them collide against the most wounded part of my heart, the part that only wanted justice, revenge, something to balance the scale after so much suffering. It's hard, I finally admitted, my voice barely a whisper. It's so hard not wanting him to suffer the way I've suffered. I know, said Jesus, and in those 2 words, there was an understanding so deep that for the first time since my father's death, I felt like someone truly understood the exact weight of what I carried. And I don't expect you to find forgiveness overnight. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip, Miriam. It's a road. And that road starts with something much simpler. Recognizing your own worth, regardless of whatever Wade or Bo tried to make you believe. We spent the rest of the morning walking through the valley, and Jesus told me about other families he'd helped, other broken hearts he'd found along his way, never sounding like a sermon, just the quiet conversation of someone simply sharing what he'd witnessed. He told me about a widow in a nearby town who'd lost her 3 children to fever in a single winter, and how, year after year, he'd watched her turn that grief into a garden that now fed 6 families for nothing in return. He told me, too, about a man who'd spent 15 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit, and who, once released, instead of seeking revenge against the people who'd falsely accused him, had dedicated the rest of his life to teaching the town's children to read, kids who'd never once set foot in a school. Each one of them faced the same fork in the road you're facing now, Jesus said, while the warm morning wind stirred the mesquite leaves around us. The pain they suffered was real, Miriam. Nobody asked them to minimize it or pretend it didn't matter. But each one of them chose, over time, what to do with that pain. And that choice, more than anything else, defined who they became. I walked in silence, letting the words settle inside me like seeds planted in ground still hard, still resistant, but not impossible to soften. And what if I'm not as strong as those people? I asked, genuine vulnerability in my voice. What if the hatred I feel is bigger than I can control? Jesus stopped, and for a moment he looked at me with a tenderness that made my throat tighten. Strength doesn't mean not feeling hatred, Miriam, he said. It means recognizing it, sitting with it, and then deciding, every single day, that you won't let it be the one writing the rest of your story. Nobody's born knowing how to do that. You learn it slowly, the way someone learns to walk again after a fall. Your worth doesn't depend on a debt that was never fair, he told me as we walked back toward the settlement under a sun already warming with midday strength. It doesn't depend on what Bo thinks you deserve, or what Wade believes he can buy. Your worth, Miriam, comes from something no man, however powerful, can ever touch. It was then, reaching the first houses of the settlement, that we found Miss Nora waiting for us, her face pale, her hands trembling, holding a crumpled piece of paper. "Teacher," she said, her voice urgent, "one of the boys found this nailed to the church door this morning." Jesus took the paper and unfolded it calmly, though I could see the tension building in his shoulders as he read. When he finished, he handed it to me without a word, and I felt the air catch in my throat, reading the rough letters scratched out in charcoal. "We know she's in Hidden Valley. Hand her over before sundown on the 3rd day, or we burn every house in that cursed settlement until we find her. Signed, Bo Colton." 3 days, I murmured, feeling the ground shift under my feet. 3 days for all these people who don't even know me to suffer because of me. Nobody's gonna suffer because of you. Jesus said, with a firmness that left no room for argument. Whatever blame there is, if there's any at all, belongs only to Beau Colton and the cruelty he's chosen to plant in this world. Miss Nora came closer and took my hands in hers, with a determination surprising for a woman her age. This settlement has survived droughts, sickness, and outlaws for generations, honey, she said. We're not handing you over. Not now, not ever. But looking at that crumpled paper in my hands, I felt a decision starting to form inside me. A decision I knew, with an uncomfortable certainty, Jesus wasn't going to receive easily. Before I tell you what happened next, there's something I want you to hear first. What I saw over the following days changed everything, but I don't want to get there without reminding you. Don't leave this video without checking the first pinned comment. That's where we left something for you. The second day of the ultimatum dawned with a strange stillness hanging over Hidden Valley. A stillness I recognized right away as the kind that comes before a storm. That suspended moment when even the birds seem to hold their breath. I can't let these people risk everything for me, I told Jesus that morning, both of us watching from the highest hill in the valley as the horizon where, according to rumors that had reached us from the neighboring town, Beau Colton was already gathering his men. I'm going to turn myself in. Jesus didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes fixed on the horizon, hands folded in front of him, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a firmness I hadn't heard from him before. That's exactly what Beau wants, he said. For you to believe your sacrifice is the only solution. For you to believe your worth is measured by how much of yourself you can give away to protect others. But it's the truth, I said, desperation taking hold of my chest again. If I stay, they're going to burn this town. Miss Nora, the children, families who don't even know me, they're all going to pay for something I did. Miriam, Jesus said, turning to look at me directly with an intensity that forced me to hold his gaze, even though everything in me wanted to look away. Listen to me carefully. Turning yourself in won't stop Beau's cruelty. It'll only confirm it. A man who builds his power on other people's fear is never satisfied with a single victim. If you surrender today, tomorrow he'll find another excuse to hurt this town. Or another. Because the cruelty he carries doesn't depend on you. It depends on him. I felt those words hit me with the force of a truth I didn't want to accept, precisely because accepting it meant giving up the only simple solution my exhausted mind had managed to build. So what do we do? I asked, my voice breaking with frustration. We can't just sit here and wait for a miracle. Jesus offered a barely visible smile, carrying a calm that contrasted with the storm approaching. Sometimes miracles don't come like lightning from the sky, Miriam, he said. Sometimes they come like the courage of an entire town, deciding to stand together against fear. Trust me a little longer, and trust the people who opened their doors to you without asking for anything in return. That afternoon, as the sun began its descent toward the third and final day of the ultimatum, the sound of hoofbeats, many horses, not just one, began rising from the main road into the valley. I stood watching from behind Miss Nora's window, feeling my heart stop at the sight of the dust cloud rising on the horizon, much bigger than the one that had chased my escape days earlier. They're here, I whispered, my hands shaking against the wooden window frame. Miss Nora squeezed my shoulder firmly beside me. Jesus already knew, the old woman said. He went out an hour ago to wait for them at the entrance of the settlement. I ran out of the house before Miss Nora could stop me, my heart pounding in my throat, and reached the entrance of the valley just in time to see something that froze my blood. Beau Colton, riding a white horse whose elegance clashed brutally with his cruelty, led a column of at least 15 armed men, all with rifles slung across their backs and expressions that left no doubt about their intentions. But between them and the first houses of the settlement, alone, unarmed, his white shirt stirring gently in the evening wind, stood Jesus. "Get out of the way," Beau shouted, stopping his horse a few feet from the lone man blocking his path. "This isn't your business, stranger. I came for what belongs to me. No person belongs to another, Bo Colton," Jesus answered, his voice, though not loud, carrying clearly to the farthest edge of the tense silence that had settled over the place. "Miriam is not yours. She never was." Bo let out a dry laugh, empty of real humor, and dismounted with slow, calculated movements, the movements of someone used to his mere presence inspiring terror. "Her father signed an agreement," he said, walking toward Jesus with measured steps. "A debt is a debt, and in this country debts get paid one way or another. If it's not with money, it's with whatever's necessary. That debt was a trap from the beginning," Jesus answered, not retreating a single step, his voice showing no trace of fear. "And you know that better than anyone, because you were the one who helped your father design it." A murmur ran through the armed men behind Bo, and for the first time, a crack of doubt seemed to cross the young Colton's confident expression. "Who do you think you are, talking to me like that?" he asked, his voice carrying an anger he could barely contain. Some drifter who decided to play hero. "I'm someone who has seen exactly what your family has done to this region for years," Jesus answered. And in that moment, something in his gaze became so intense, so charged with an authority that seemed to transcend the human, that even the armed men behind Bo started exchanging uneasy glances. "I've seen the families you impoverished with impossible debts. I've seen the men you buried in unmarked graves for daring to question you. And I've seen, Bo, the emptiness you carry in your chest. An emptiness that not all your father's power or money has ever managed to fill." Bo went visibly pale, and for an instant something like fear crossed his eyes before fury took control of his expression again. "Enough talk," he shouted, turning toward his men. "Search the town house by house until you find her." But none of the men moved. They stayed frozen on their horses, exchanging looks with a hesitation Bo hadn't expected, until one of them, an older man with a face weathered by years of ranch work, finally spoke. "Boss," he said, his voice carrying obvious discomfort, "my daughter got real sick 2 winters back, and it was this same man who healed her when no doctor around here could do a thing. I'm not raising a gun against him." The murmur of agreement that followed among several of the other men made Bo's face twist with a rage he could no longer hide. "Cowards!" he bellowed, drawing his own pistol and aiming it directly at Jesus. "If none of you have the nerve to do your job, I'll do it myself." I had been watching the whole scene hidden behind one of the houses, and I felt the world stop at the sight of that gun aimed straight at the man who had saved my life. Without thinking, without weighing the risk, I ran out into the open space between them. "No," I shouted, placing myself between Jesus and the barrel of Bo's gun. "If you're going to shoot, shoot me." The silence that followed was absolute. Bo, gun still raised but his hand visibly shaking, looked at me with an expression mixing fury, surprise, and something deeper, something that looked almost like pain. "Lower the gun, Bo," Jesus said, his calm not wavering an inch despite the tension of the moment. "You've already lost this fight, even if you don't know it yet. The fear you built with your name is starting to crumble right in front of your own eyes." Bo, his face falling apart, slowly lowered the gun, and for an instant, I could see beneath all the cruelty and arrogance a man deeply afraid that his power could vanish so easily. "This isn't over," he muttered, backing toward his horse. "I'll be back, and next time no small-town healer's trick is going to save you, stranger." He mounted his horse with rough movements, and without another word, pulled the reins and started riding away from the valley, followed slowly by his men, several of whom cast apologetic looks toward Jesus and me before disappearing into the distance. I turned to Jesus, my heart still racing from the adrenaline, and found him watching me with a mix of concern and quiet pride lighting up his face. "That was very brave, Miriam," he said, "and very dangerous. I learned it from someone who did exactly the same thing for me without even knowing me," I answered, a trembling but genuine smile on my face. but the calm of the moment broke when one of the settlement's kids came running breathless, a crumpled paper in his hand he'd found dropped near where Bo had dismounted. "Teacher," the boy said, handing the paper to Jesus. "This fell out of the boss's pocket." Jesus unfolded the paper, and his expression, usually so serene, darkened visibly as he read. He handed it to me without a word, and I felt a new chill run through my body reading what appeared to be a half-finished letter addressed to Wade Colton, words that revealed a secret that would change everything I thought I knew about my own father's death. I held the crumpled paper in my shaking hands, reading the words again and again, as if repeating the reading could change their meaning, could turn that brutal truth into a mistake, a misunderstanding, anything other than what my eyes clearly showed me. Father. Old Rashid's starting to suspect the debt was rigged from the start. If he keeps digging through the ledgers, he might find proof we adjusted the interest after every payment. We need to handle this before he talks to anyone else. The letter cut off there, unfinished, but the words I'd already read were enough to make my whole world collapse beneath me. My father knew, I whispered, my voice breaking on every word. My father found out the debt was fake, that it was all a setup, and I couldn't finish the sentence. The implication was too monstrous to say out loud, but Jesus, with a gentleness that didn't lessen the gravity of what he was about to confirm, finished the thought for me. And he died 3 weeks after that letter, he said, his voice soft but firm. A death everyone in the region assumed was a sudden fever, and no one ever dared question the official story the Colton family gave. I felt my legs give out and dropped onto a nearby rock, the paper still clutched between my fingers. Miss Nora, who'd come running when she heard the commotion, knelt beside me, holding my hands. "They murdered him," I said, my voice no longer a whisper, but a strangled cry of pure pain. "My father didn't die of a fever. They murdered him. And then they handed me over like I was just another part of the same loot they'd already stolen." The pain I'd carried for months, the quiet grief of a daughter mourning her father without suspecting the scale of the betrayal, transformed into something entirely different, something darker, sharper, something that burned in my chest with an intensity I'd never felt before. "I want them to suffer," I said, fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. "I want Wade and Bo to feel exactly the same terror my father felt. I want to see them fall. I want to see them lose everything. I want—" "Miriam," Jesus interrupted, his voice, without ever rising, cutting through the storm of fury consuming me. "Look at me." I lifted my eyes, brimming with tears of rage, and found in Jesus' gaze not reproach, but an understanding so deep that for a moment it managed to quiet, if only a little, the tempest inside me. "You have every right to feel that anger," he said. "Your father was murdered by men who then tried to steal you too. Nobody, not even me, has the right to tell you not to feel that. But I need you to hear something important. And I need you to hear it with your heart open, not closed off by the pain." I nodded weakly, my whole body still trembling, while Miss Nora rubbed my back in silence. "If you let that desire for revenge run every decision you make from here forward," Jesus continued, "Wade and Bo will have taken something from you they didn't even need a weapon to steal. Your peace. They'll have turned you, without even touching you, into a bitter, consumed version of the woman you really are. And that, Miriam, would be a second death for your father, because he didn't raise a daughter just to watch her destroyed by the same poison that killed him." "So what am I supposed to do?" I asked, genuine desperation in my voice. "Just forgive them. Let them keep living like nothing happened, while my father's in the ground for daring to look for the truth." "I'm not talking about letting them walk free without consequences," Jesus answered, a clarity in his voice that surprised me. "Justice and revenge aren't the same thing, even if they sometimes get confused when the pain is as big as yours. Justice seeks the truth coming into the light. seeks the people who did harm answering for their actions before the law and before the community. Revenge only wants the other person to suffer as much as you did, without that ever actually giving you back what you lost. I stayed quiet, processing the distinction, feeling the clarity of those words start to cut through the thick fog of my fury. "That letter," I finally said, pointing at the paper Jesus still held. "It's proof. Real proof that they rigged the debt, that they knew my father had figured out the scheme." "Exactly," Jesus confirmed. And for the first time since I'd read the letter, a spark of determination replaced part of the despair in his eyes. And if that proof exists, there's probably more. The ledgers the letter mentions, for example. If we can find them, you'll have something far more powerful than any weapon. Documented truth, capable of bringing down the whole empire of lies the Coltons built over the years. Miss Nora, who'd listened to the whole exchange in silence, finally spoke, a thoughtful look crossing her weathered face. "My late husband worked as a bookkeeper on the Colton Ranch for almost 10 years, she said. Before he died, he told me Wade kept all his important documents, the ones he didn't want anyone else to see, in a metal box hidden behind a false panel in his study. I never understood why he told me that. Until now. If you're still here, this is the part I want you to actually sit with. If you believe he can find you the same way he found me in that canyon, whatever your own canyon looks like right now, comment the words, 'I came to save you' below this video. I read every single one." "Do you know exactly where that box is?" I asked. Urgency renewed in my voice. "I do," Miss Nora confirmed. "But going into that ranch, honey, is exactly what Bo's hoping you'll do. It'd be walking straight into the wolf's mouth." I looked at Jesus, searching his expression for some sign of what he thought about that risk, and found in his eyes something I didn't expect. Not the protective warning he'd shown before, but a quiet respect for the decision I was about to make. "I'm not going to tell you not to do it, Miriam," he finally said. "This choice belongs only to you. But if you choose this path, I want you to know you won't walk it alone." "I know," I answered, a determination hardening my features in a way Miss Nora had never seen in the frightened young woman who'd arrived in the valley just days before. "I'm going into that ranch. I'm going to find that box. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of monsters Wade and Bo Colton really are." That night, while the rest of the settlement slept, I sat by the fire with Jesus and Miss Nora, mapping out a plan that, dangerous as it was, represented the first real chance at justice I'd had since my father died. Miss Nora drew a rough map of Wade's study in the dirt with a stick, marking the location of the false panel, the distance to the service door rarely watched, and the hours the boss usually left to check on the more distant fields. "Tuesday afternoons is when there's the fewest people around the main house," the old woman explained, with the precision of someone who'd heard those details repeated by her husband for years. "Wade rides out. Bo usually goes with him, and there's only 2 or 3 staff left in the kitchen on the other side of the property." I memorized every detail, feeling the determination born from rage starting to turn into something more useful, a strategic clarity I'd never needed to develop before, back when my life was just field work and caring for a father growing sicker by the day. "We'll need someone watching the roads in," said Jesus, joining the planning with a practicality that surprised me pleasantly. "And we'll need a safe place to keep those documents once we have them, somewhere out of the Coltons' reach until you can bring them to the right authorities." "Pastor Alvarez," Miss Nora started, then corrected herself with a sad smile. "Sorry, honey. I mean the pastor in the next town over, not your father. He's been documenting complaints against the Coltons for years. He's got contacts with an investigator at the state attorney general's office who hasn't been bought off by that family's money. If we bring him solid proof, he'll know exactly what to do with it." I felt like, for the first time in weeks, the plan taking shape in front of me didn't depend only on luck or desperation, but on a network of people willing to take a risk for a cause that finally seemed to have a real, tangible, reachable way out. Tuesday arrived wrapped in that particular tense calm you only find in the moments before an irreversible decision. I dressed in clothes, borrowed from one of the women in the settlement, a dark, simple dress that would let me move without drawing attention, and felt my hands barely tremble as I braided my hair. A calm that surprised even me. Like the pain of the last days had finally forged something solid inside me. "Are you sure about this?" Jesus asked, helping me onto the horse that would carry us toward the Colton Ranch. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I answered, and in my voice there was no trace left of the paralyzing fear that had made me run barefoot through the desert days before. The ride to the Colton Ranch took a little over an hour, crossing trails Miss Nora had carefully marked on her improvised map, avoiding the main roads where we might run into patrols. Jesus rode beside me, and I noticed that as we got closer to the property, his expression took on a different gravity, like something bigger than simple concern for my safety had started weighing on his shoulders. "This is it," he said when we finally spotted the ranch's white walls in the distance, surrounded by fields stretching out to the horizon. "Remember every detail," Miss Nora explained. "Go in through the service door, stay close to the walls, and don't stop for anything until you reach the study." "Are you coming with me?" I asked, feeling a genuine flash of fear at the thought of facing alone the halls of the house that had orchestrated my family's destruction. "I'll be close," Jesus answered. "But this part of the road, Miriam, you have to walk yourself. You need to prove to yourself, not to me, not to Bo, not even to your father's memory, that you can face this with your own strength." I nodded, understanding, even as the fear stayed present, that those words carried an essential truth about the healing journey that had begun the moment Jesus pulled me up onto his horse in that canyon. I dismounted near a cluster of trees offering enough cover, and with my heart pounding hard but my steps steady, started walking toward the ranch's back door. The inside of the property smelled like orange blossoms and candle wax, an aroma that clashed brutally with the cruelty I knew hid behind every whitewashed wall. I moved along the shadows, exactly as I'd been instructed, hearing the distant echo of voices in the kitchen, the clink of dishes being washed, footsteps moving away in the opposite direction from where I needed to go. I found the study exactly where Miss Nora said it would be. A dark wooden door at the end of a carpeted hallway, with a padlock that, to my surprise, gave way fairly easily to the metal hairpin I'd brought with me. The inside was exactly as I'd imagined it during nights of planning, shelves full of ledgers, an imposing carved wooden desk, and on the far wall a panel that, on closer inspection, showed the subtle irregularity of newer wood than the rest of the paneling. Hands shaking with adrenaline, I pressed the edge of the panel, just as Miss Nora had told me, and felt a satisfying click as the wood gave way, revealing a hidden compartment where a small metal box sat closed with a small padlock. "Come on," I whispered to myself, forcing the padlock with the same hairpin I'd used on the door. The lock gave after several anxious tries, and I opened the box to find exactly what I'd hoped for. Dozens of pages of ledgers, letters, and documents that even at first glance clearly showed the patterns of financial manipulation that had destroyed my family, and, I quickly noticed, tied at least 6 other families in the region to the same scheme. It was in that moment, as I stuffed the documents into the cloth bag I'd hidden under my dress, that I heard footsteps approaching down the hallway. Firm, deliberate footsteps that left no doubt about who was coming. Well, said Bo Colton's voice from the doorway, a cold smile spreading across his face. "I didn't expect you to be so predictable, Miriam. Or so brave. I still can't decide which one surprises me more." I turned slowly, the bag of documents clutched against my chest, feeling my heart pound with a force that threatened to give me away even without a single word. "I know the truth, Bo," I said, my voice, to my own surprise, sounding firm and clear. "I know what you did to my father. I know exactly how you built your fortune on the destruction of entire families." Bo's face hardened, and he stepped forward, shutting the study door behind him with a sharp bang that echoed like a sentence. "Those documents aren't leaving this room," he said, his voice losing any trace of the calculated calm he usually showed. And neither are you, if you keep insisting on playing the hero. I'm not playing anything, I answered, backing toward the window while mentally calculating my options. I'm just doing what you and your father should have done years ago, facing the consequences of your own actions. Bo took another step forward, hands clenched into fists at his sides, and for an instant, I thought the situation was about to slip past anything I'd imagined I could control. But then the study door burst open, and Jesus walked in with a presence that seemed to fill the whole room with a quiet but absolute authority. "This ends now, Bo," he said, positioning himself between me and the furious man, with a movement so calm it was almost unsettling given the danger of the moment. "How did you get in here?" Bo demanded, instinctively backing away from Jesus' presence, an expression mixing fury and something like primal fear. "This is private property. I got in the same way truth always finds its way into the light." "Sooner or later," Jesus answered, a calm that clashed violently with Bo's growing desperation. "And that truth, Bo, is about to leave this ranch, no matter how hard you try to stop it." Right then, more hurried footsteps sounded from the hallway, and Wade Colton burst into the study, his face twisted with a fury he hadn't shown so openly in years. Behind him, 2 staff members who'd heard the commotion peered in cautiously from the hall, not daring to enter, eyes wide at the scene unfolding in front of them. "Enough!" Wade roared, looking back and forth between me, Jesus, and the documents peeking out of the bag I still held. "I don't know who you think you are, stranger, but you just made the worst mistake of your life." I felt the air grow thick, almost impossible to breathe, as I watched the man who'd orchestrated my father's death standing in front of me for the first time, with the same stone face I'd seen on the rare occasions Rashid had mentioned his boss during the last years of his life. There was no trace of remorse in Wade, no shadow of doubt about the cruelty of his own actions, only the cold fury of a man used to the whole world bending to his will. "You killed my father," I said, my voice, to my own surprise, not shaking. "You murdered him because he found out the debt tying him to this ranch was a lie built to steal everything he had. And then, when there was nothing left to take from him, you decided I was the next payment due." "Words!" Wade spat with contempt. "No court in this country is going to believe the accusations of an uneducated girl against a man of my standing." "You won't need to believe my words," I answered, holding the bag of documents up with a firmness that surprised even Jesus. "You'll believe your own handwriting, your own ledgers, every fraudulent adjustment you wrote yourself with your own hand over the years." Wade's face went visibly pale at the specific mention of the documents, and it was in that moment of hesitation that he stepped toward a drawer in the desk, and I, my heart stopping, understood exactly what he was about to pull out of it. But before the old man's hand could close around the weapon he kept in there, Jesus spoke with a voice that seemed to carry a weight beyond the physical. "Lower that hand, Wade Colton," he said. And though he didn't shout, though he didn't move from where he stood, something in the tone of his voice made the old man's hand stop halfway, trembling like an invisible force held it suspended in the air. "You've caused enough death and suffering in this region. This ends today." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by Wade's ragged breathing, his face gone from fury to a sickly paleness. Like for the first time in years, he found himself truly defenseless against something he couldn't buy or intimidate. Wade's hand stayed suspended halfway to the drawer, trembling visibly, while his face reflected an internal struggle that seemed to tear him apart from the inside. The fury used to imposing itself by force against something new, something he'd never felt before in his life of absolute power, a fear he didn't know how to name, but that paralyzed him completely. "What are you doing to me?" he asked, his voice breaking, so different from the cold authority he'd shown seconds before. "I'm not doing anything to you that you haven't already built with years of cruelty, Wade," Jesus answered, without moving from his spot, his gaze seeming to reach the most hidden corner of the old man's soul. What you're feeling right now is simply the truth finally catching up to you after so long running from it. Bo, who'd watched the whole scene in growing, terrified silence, backed against the wall, eyes fixed on his father, like he was seeing for the first time, with brutal clarity, the true nature of the man who'd taught him everything he knew about power and control. "Dad," he said, his voice sounding for the first time since I'd known him genuinely young, genuinely lost. "Is it true? Did you order them to kill Miriam's father?" Wade didn't answer right away. His hand finally fell empty to his side, and his shoulders, always held so erect with the arrogance of someone who'd never had to answer for anything, sagged under a weight that seemed to have been carried for years without ever fully letting himself feel it. "I just wanted to protect what we'd built," he murmured, his voice carrying no trace left of his earlier cruelty, something closer to the desperate confession of a man finally confronted with the real reflection of his own actions. Rashid was threatening to destroy everything, the contracts, the land, our family's reputation. I didn't see another way out. "There's always another way, Wade," Jesus said, a genuine sadness softening the firmness of his words. "You chose not to see it because power, and the fear of losing it, blinded you for too long. But you still have right now, in this moment, the chance to choose something different." I watched that scene, one I never imagined I'd witness. The most powerful and feared man in the region, reduced to a trembling confession in front of the truth, and felt something loosen in my own chest. Something that had been held tight by months of accumulated pain. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the beginning of something close to it. The understanding that real, complete justice didn't require me to become the instrument of revenge myself. "I'm going to hand these documents over to the pastor in the next town," I said, a firm voice ringing clearly through the silent study. "And he's going to bring them to the state attorney general's office. You're going to answer for what you did, Wade, before the law, before this community, before every family you destroyed with your lies." Wade nodded slowly, with no strength left to resist, his face that of a man finally understanding that the empire built on other people's fear was crumbling, not by force of arms, but by the simple, unstoppable weight of the truth. Everything that followed happened faster than even I expected. The pastor in the next town, receiving the documents and hearing my full testimony, immediately contacted the investigator at the state attorney general's office, who, armed with irrefutable evidence of fraud and extortion, and the connections that finally started clarifying the real circumstances of my father's death, ordered a formal investigation into Wade Colton. The land he'd taken through fraudulent debts was returned to the rightful families, including my own father's land, which now, for the first time in my life, belonged to me without any shadow of debt or threat hanging over it. During the weeks of the investigation, I had to face, one after another, the same painful questions before the investigator and before the community gathered in the small town hall. How had I discovered the truth? What had I felt reading the letter confirming my father's murder? Had I ever doubted my own ability to see this fight through to the end? Every time the words threatened to break me, I felt Jesus' quiet presence among the crowd. And that presence was enough to remind me I wasn't facing any of it alone, that every step of that process, however painful, brought me a little closer to the freedom I'd longed for so badly. Bo, to the surprise of the whole town, didn't try to defend his father before the law. Instead, he voluntarily handed over additional records he'd kept hidden for years, in a late but genuine attempt to begin repairing, even if only a little, the damage caused by his family. He came to see me one afternoon without an escort, without the arrogance that had always defined him, and asked for my forgiveness with clumsy but sincere words, admitting he'd spent his whole life repeating, without ever questioning them, the same cruelties his father had taught him as if they were virtues. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he told me, eyes down. "I just needed you to know I finally understand what we did." I didn't answer right away. I looked at that man who'd once represented the greatest threat of my whole life, and found, to my own surprise, that I no longer felt the burning hatred I'd carried weeks before, but something closer to a tired pity, an understanding that cruelty often isn't born alone, but gets inherited like a disease passed down generation to generation. Forgiveness isn't something I can give you overnight, Beau, I finally told him. But acknowledging what you did, the way you just did, is a start. What you do with the rest of your life will say a lot more than any words you say today. It wasn't an easy or immediate path, and I knew real transformation of a heart took a lot more than one desperate confession. But I recognized in that gesture at least the beginning of something like genuine repentance. The months that followed brought a transformation I never imagined possible. With my father's land finally restored, I rebuilt the small house where I'd grown up, this time with the help of the whole Hidden Valley settlement, who arrived with wagons loaded with lumber, tools, and the quiet determination of people who'd learned, thanks to me, that one person's courage could change the fate of an entire community. One afternoon, months after justice finally caught up with the Coltons, I found myself sitting by the same river where Jesus had first talked to me about forgiveness and dignity, watching the sun set behind the mountains in a golden color that seemed different now, warmer, fuller of promise. "Are you going to stay then?" Jesus asked, sitting beside me with the same serene calm that had defined him from the very first day. "This is my home," I answered, with a smile that no longer carried any shadow of the fear that had defined my life for so long. "My father's land, this town that took me in when I had nothing left to offer but my own broken story. Yes, I'm staying." Jesus nodded with an expression of quiet satisfaction that seemed to go beyond simple happiness at how the conflict had resolved. "Your father would be proud of the woman you've become, Miriam," he said. "Not just for the justice you won, but for the heart you chose to keep intact through this whole journey. More than any land or any legal victory, that's your real inheritance." I felt tears rising again, but this time they were tears of a peace I'd never known, a gratitude that stretched beyond the justice I'd received, to the quiet transformation that had happened inside me. The shift from rage toward something more luminous, more sustainable, something that let me look toward the future without the constant weight of hatred. "I'll never be able to repay what you did for me," I said, turning to him with total sincerity. "You saved my life in that canyon. Yes, but more than that, you helped me find who I really was underneath all the pain and fear." "You don't need to repay me anything, Miriam," Jesus answered, a tenderness lighting up every word. "The only thing I hope is that you keep walking this road of dignity and compassion, and that someday, when you find someone else lost in their own dark canyon, you reach out the same hand I reached out to you." I need to tell you honestly what happened after that, because it matters more than a tidy ending would. I had been raised Muslim my whole life, taught to honor Isa as one of the greatest prophets God ever sent, and sitting by that river, having lived what I'd lived, I could no longer think of the man beside me as only that. I asked him directly, one evening not long after, whether it was truly what I was starting to believe. He didn't rush me. He never once rushed me. He simply told me the truth as gently as he'd told me everything else since that morning in the canyon. "I am the way," he said. Not one more voice pointing toward it. The way itself. I was baptized that following spring, in that same river, in front of Miss Nora and most of the settlement that had taken me in when I had nothing left. I told them plainly, standing in that water, that I believed Jesus Christ is Lord, not only a prophet, that everything I had been taught to honor about him was true and not nearly enough on its own. Miss Nora cried through the whole thing, holding both my hands the second I came up out of the water. The sun finished sinking behind the mountains, painting the whole sky in shades of violet and gold. And I, sitting by the river that had witnessed my transformation, felt that for the first time since my father's death, the future no longer represented a threat, but an open promise full of possibility. Hidden Valley, the settlement that had given me refuge in my darkest hour, had become my true home, a place where my father's memory lived not in the sadness of his absence, but in the recovered dignity of the daughter who never stopped honoring his name. And in the quiet nights that followed, when the whole settlement gathered around the fires to share stories and give thanks for the blessings received, there was always a place saved by the fire for the man in the white shirt who had come without anyone calling him, exactly when he was needed most, reminding all of us, with his quiet presence alone, that faith, hope, and real love always find their way to whoever needs them most. If this story stirred something in you tonight, don't leave yet. Check the first pinned comment under this video. That's where we left something for you. And if you believe he's already out there in your own canyon, waiting for you to run toward him, comment the words "I came to save you" below. I read every single one. May Jesus walk with you today and in every day that is still ahead of you. Amen.